Everybody, and welcome back. I don't know why every week I do this. I go really low. Don't need to do that. It's a really professional studio. Welcome back to Benevolent Banter for another week. It is Friday morning, our best morning of the week, TGIF. And today we have a very, very, very special guest. Very, good things come in three. Special guest. And I don't know if I told you this. I don't think I did. But one thing that I do,
We're about to find out.
Yeah, you're about to find out. Putting you on the spot. So one thing I like to do is not to introduce guests. Yep. I like to have the guests introduce themselves.
Sure.
So however you want to do that,
sure.
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Okay, so hi, I'm Amanda Pilbrow, and I have just finished my Master's in Theology. And I have, with my husband Bruce, we've been married 30 years, and we have 3 grown-up children. One that's travelling the world at the moment with his lovely wife, one that's in Auckland, and another one that's in Auckland also. So we have a fairly busy, noisy life. When everyone is in the house around the table, it is chaotic. I'm actually the introvert of the family.
No.
Oh yeah, I'm the introvert of the family. So
Me
I
too.
have to, I have to lift it up to sort of play the game around the table, around the dining table. But yeah, that's me. So I used to be a young adults pastor for about 5 years. Came to the end of that season and had this real angst that what was being taught was not necessarily melding with people's reality. Yeah. And that's really heavy stuff to kind of wrestle with, and also to put yourself in a position to go, I've got some stuff I've got to unlearn. And that's not a nice place to be.
So tell me a little bit about that, and maybe even just the kind of bridge between the two seasons, the 2 chapters of your life. So theology student, but before that, a youth pastor. What were the kinds of things that you were seeing?
I think what it was there was just this general regurgitation of theology, and there's some really good theology, but there was also some theology that doesn't fit in with how we live our lives today. So I'm in the process of reading a book by Peter Enns, and it's called How the Bible Actually Works, and he's an amazing theologian. He's really funny to read. He's self-deprecating, which is really good for Kiwis to read. But he's an American himself, and
a self-deprecating American.
Yeah. Like, where does that come from?
Well, okay.
But he talks about the necessity for wisdom within theology. So we can have all these ideas of what theology looks like or what we think God looks like, but it doesn't mean a lot unless we use wisdom and bring it into what our reality is.
What does he define as wisdom?
I think it's a discernment process. It's understanding that what was written in the Bible was for that time. It's kind of like, if we have acronyms like LOL. Now, right? So we know what that means. Yeah. But in 100 years' time, if someone's listening to this podcast, they're going, what the frick is LOL? Right? So
lots of love.
Yeah.
Wait, no.
Yeah, what does it mean? So we have to use our wisdom and go, that's no longer appropriate or can no longer be integrated into what we're doing now.
From a super literal.
From a super literal point of view. So what does wisdom look like to understand that context? So context is really important. Yeah. A lot of my young adults, incredible young people, and I loved being part of that community. What we tried to do was we tried to have a community where people could come just as they are. Yeah. You know, often when you go, or my experience growing up in church was you would come, you'd put on your best dress, you'd put on your best face, and regardless of what's happened in the week, you just show that you've got everything together.
That's right.
And that doesn't work for me. That's not relationship. Yeah. So within this young adult community, it was very much about, don't you dare leave your shit at the door. Right. You bring it in.
And we talk about it.
And we talk about it. And we all just hold it up. Like, we figure this out together. And it's messy. I love messy community.
I don't know a community that isn't.
Yeah, but there are lots of communities that put on that face. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really unhealthy. So we have, I think, a lot of Christians, and I'm being very general here. They think they have to look like they've got it all together, rather than being the creative people of grace, which also means we receive grace because we know we haven't got it together.
Yes, it's being comfortable with imperfection.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does. So you're going to find out really quickly that I have not read the Bible. At least for a good 25 years, I have not cracked that book open, which I should probably do at some point. Do the religious, do the mandates, do the texts, do they allow for that kind of imperfection and openness?
Yeah, they do very much. And I think this is where perhaps theology has perhaps taken us on a different journey. Jesus was always with the wrong people in the wrong places at the wrong time, deliberately, and that's exactly the place that he wanted to be. And then before that, I mean, the whole Bible is full of stories of messy people that have totally screwed it up.
That's right.
And yet their stories are so important. And it's not to take those stories as literal outcomes for what our situations are, but again to go, okay, that was a really dumb thing that happened there.
How do we learn from it?
How do we learn from that? How do we not do that again? How do we, through wisdom, understand what it looks like today?
And I imagine then show that grace that hopefully we learn to show to ourselves.
Yeah, and I think showing it to ourselves is probably the most difficult part.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I have so many questions for you. What changed? It feels like when you said that Jesus was putting himself in places where he was on the outskirts, where he was with the people who might not have been surrounded by the communities of the time. What has changed?
What has changed from then until now?
Because it feels like now that religion, and not just Christianity, but religions are saying we're the chosen ones. And then, if you're gay, if there's other things happening, you're not a part of this. You're going to hell. You're sinners. All of these things. But it felt like Jesus was drawn to the sinners.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where'd that narrative shift?
So, for me, the narrative shifted in the story of Cornelius, which is found in the book of Acts. So the book of Acts is about what was happening after the death of Jesus and how the church evolved and how the people discovered how to be Jesus followers and people of God. So there's a story in the book of Acts where Peter, who was one of the disciples, is asleep on the roof and he has a dream. He has a vision, and it's of this big tablecloth that comes down. And on it is a variety of things that traditionally the Hebrew people were told were unclean, were abominations. There was food on, mostly it was food, that's what the vision was about. It was talking about all these things that you have been told that are not good, that are separated from you, that you are to remain a distance from, an abomination. So Peter has this dream, this vision, and in that vision he hears God saying, don't you dare call anything unclean that I have created. What was once unclean is now clean.
Yeah.
So there's this whole shift in there where God is going, yes, I understand we had the laws and the rules for a reason there, but things are moving. Things are progressing. Things are
amazing.
My ongoing creative journey with the people that I've created. This is where we're going.
That's pretty cool.
So he has that dream. But the interesting thing is, at the same time, there's a man called Cornelius.
Yeah.
And he is a Gentile, and he's separated from the Hebrew people. So he's an unclean. And he sends 2 people to go and find Peter. So as Peter's finishing his dream, these 2 people turn up, and they go, Cornelius would like you to come to his house. Wrong person, wrong place, wrong time. So because of this vision that Peter's had, he goes to Cornelius's house. He's not meant to go. He's not meant to be there. Cornelius invites him into his house. He's not meant to go in the house. This is unclean. Cornelius invites him to have a meal. Sure as heck should not be eating. And then he invites him to stay the night. Wrong people, wrong place.
Yeah.
And what happens is Peter discovers that the Holy Spirit is already at Cornelius' house without anything that Peter's done.
Wow.
So it's God's way of showing I'm already in everything that I've created. Don't call it unclean.
That's
it
amazing.
is my creation. So that for me,
it's power of stories, man.
It's such a powerful story, but it's so easy to read over it, and just not actually get to the depth of what was going on in this. And then Peter actually then goes to the council, the Jerusalem council, and says, "Lo and behold, God has turned up, and the wrong people, in the wrong place." At the wrong time.
It still sounds.
What do we do with that?
Yeah, it sounds like it could be a modern day story.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So that for me was a real turning point when I started to listen to that story and realize that I had a whole heap of unlearning to do. Yeah.
Which then brings us to your study.
To my study. Yeah.
Please tell us a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yes.
I started. So just so you know, I started to read Amanda's work. And then I decided to stop reading at the juiciest bits because I wanted to just ask you all the questions, around your methodology, around the why you were seeking to understand this. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what it is that you've just put out into the world and how you came to even having that idea.
So I grew up in an environment where women, especially within church, were not allowed to be in positions of leadership. Patriarchal is probably the right word or terminology to use there. So growing up, I never questioned it. It was never really affected me. I didn't want to be a preacher. I didn't want to be a young adults leader. So why would it affect me?
Yeah.
And then I was asked to share on a Sunday morning on Mother's Day. And that was the only time that a woman would be able to stand up and share something. So I stood up and I shared. And Bruce was in the audience, and he just looked at me and he just said, "Man, God's got something on you. And like, we've got to rethink this." And it was actually Bruce that brought it to the forefront. We went to Bible college, and at Bible college I did some Old Testament papers and some New Testament papers, but the whole time I was wrestling with this idea of citizenship. I was very much a second-class citizen, and I had to figure out if there were second-class citizens in the family of God, did I want to be part of that family?
Yeah.
That was a major crossroad for me.
That would have been a lot of unpacking.
A lot of unpacking.
Yeah.
A lot of tears.
Yeah.
A lot of wrestling with God, a lot of arguing with God.
Yeah.
And what I was actually doing was I was arguing with myself, because what I discovered was God didn't actually have an issue. It was actually just the environment that I grew up in and the theology that I grew up in. So
chills.
I had to shed a whole heap of things that I thought were foundational. And there's still triggers. There's still triggers for me.
Yeah.
And even when I was in ministry, some people would be it's just the comments, it's just the looks,
Yeah.
it's the, oh no, we would never have a female senior pastor here. And I'm like, really?
What? But why?
Why? Like,
That's
we
interesting.
bring an empathy and an understanding to Scripture that 95% of our pastoral leaders who are men, they don't have that perspective.
No.
We need
Amazing.
We need to somehow equal that up. So we went through that, and it wasn't until several years later that this role came up at the church that we were attending. And I was like, oh, no, it's not me. And it's actually my kids that went, come on, Mum, you got to step up.
That's cool.
Put your brave underpants on, step up, get this done.
Pull them up.
Pull them right up.
You're in.
And so I went and applied, and I got this role.
Oh,
it was
cool.
a shared role with another young guy, fabulous young guy. And for the first 2 weeks, I swear I went home in tears every night.
Oh, shit.
Because I was like, what am I doing here? Like, who do I think I am?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was that shedding and the unlearning process just continuing on. So I was there for 5 years, and then we were doing a series on relationships.
Yep.
And within that series, there was a week on homosexuality.
Ooh.
Now, you've got to understand, this is really rare for churches to touch this.
Oh, totally.
Because it's one of those taboo topics.
Yep.
You have people that support your church that have very strong views.
Yes.
So it's one of those areas that theologically you don't want to go, and also practically you don't want to go.
Right.
Your job might be on the line.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
But much to the credit of this particular church, that was part of it.
Cool.
So me and the senior pastor sat down and we discussed it, and we'd done reading. There's no way that we could do enough reading within 3 weeks because it was coming up. And we both gave our message on that. It's not a message that I would give today.
Yeah.
Because I've done a lot of unlearning since then.
Yeah.
It was okay for that time.
What was the crux of it? What was the crux of it?
For me, the crux of it was, okay, maybe this isn't what God has intended for people.
Gotcha.
But we have to, how we relate to other people is our responsibility.
How we respond.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So that was very much sort of the line that I was taking. Maybe it was the easy line. I didn't find it easy, but maybe it was.
Yeah, I don't know.
But even if we could get to that line,
yeah, that's right.
it's a very good starting point.
For 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And unpacking everything else. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So I think from that, because I started to read, I was like, I've got to unlearn a whole heap of stuff again. Like this is just the same as women in ministry. This is unlearning again what I thought was foundational around sexuality. Damn, this is hard. This is hard stuff. So I think probably my church saw the writing on the wall before I did, which is never a good thing.
Sounds like me in corporate jobs.
Yeah, yeah. And I came to my own realization, as the senior pastor did also, that it was time for me to move on.
Yes.
And I took what we call a sabbatical, which actually really was a breakdown. So I had about 6 months where the tears just flowed for about 6 months.
Yep.
I couldn't go to church, couldn't be around God's
Yeah.
people,
Yep.
didn't like God's people,
Yep.
and by association didn't particularly like God either.
Yep.
And then I did what every person that has a breakdown does. I went into full-time study.
Yeah.
Why not? So I put my proposal forward for my master's, and it was accepted, and the ethics was accepted. And then the process was, the methodology that I used was narrative inquiry.
Tell us a little bit about that,
so
because I have heard that only by
Yeah.
reading through your document.
Yeah. So narrative inquiry is very popular in sort of the social sciences and in education. It's only just starting to come into theology, which is a shame because the Bible is full of stories.
So it feels like it would just be perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a perfect fit. So the idea with narrative methodology is you interview people. They have to fit a certain criteria, and you interview them, and their stories become the authority. So my voice is not the authority, which actually
that would be
struggled
hard.
with.
Yeah,
I struggled
that would be hard.
that was really difficult. So their stories become the authority of the research.
Yeah.
And the findings come out of that. In that also you have to do a literature review, which means you have to read literature on all spectrums that look at sexuality within a Christian perspective.
Wow.
And in that there was some brilliant stuff, but there was also some disgusting stuff.
Yeah.
There were a couple of books that as I read them, I felt dirty.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to throw them.
Yeah.
And just the language
my chest just got real tight.
The language that was used was just so nasty and so hurtful. And as I started to read, this whole spectrum of research done by academics, I started to discover what I could no longer hold on to.
Yeah.
And at the same time discover a hope of what I could hold on to.
Wow.
So that's really...
It's your little bright light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. The 7 people that I ended up interviewing, incredible people. Their stories are very much interwoven with my own story.
Yeah.
They've changed how I see things. I think I always knew that they would. Yeah. But I don't think I understood the impact that they would have.
I've always believed that narratives are our most magical resource as humans.
Yeah.
And when we can carry each other's narrative and tell it back as well, that empathy and connection are just heightened.
To sit across from somebody and have them tell their story about how they knew from perhaps age 8 that something was different to their peers about them. Yeah. And to know that they had to keep it quiet. And the shame and the judgment that came with that for many, many years. Yeah. And also wrestling with God. One of the findings in here was that with each of my interviewees, they prayed and they prayed and they begged God that they would be straight, that God would fix them, that they would have an attraction to the opposite sex. Yeah.
What a sad thing to think that you need to be fixed.
Yeah.
Knowing and with your God or your belief system that God is about love and has created you for a reason in the way that you're created for a reason.
Yeah. And I think the whole aspect of it within a Christian dynamic is much more intense. There's this idea that people choose to be gay because they're being rebellious. They're being rebellious against their family, their church, God, or perhaps they've been brought up so their circumstances have caused something in them to be broken.
Gotcha.
It could be that they had an overbearing mother and an absent father, which, if that was the case,
most people would be gay bows.
Yeah, I have 3 kids, and I'm sure I've been an overbearing mother at times. But there's all these different aspects that are fed in through a guilt system, and a shame system. Yep. A couple of my interviewees, they said the thing that they feared most by coming out was that they could never take it back again.
Ooh.
And they say that because they were so fearful that their parents would think it was their fault.
So they weren't just thinking about themselves, they were thinking of the ripple effect to their families, to their communities, to even the church. Holy shit. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's pretty heavy.
Yeah, it is heavy.
So how long did you sit with them once? Did you sit with them multiple times?
So we had an initial meeting. So I didn't know any of my interviewees. One of them I'd met off by chance, but nothing substantial. So I like to drink wine. So we would
Who doesn't?
we would meet after work because most of them worked.
Yep.
We'd have a wine or a coffee, and I would just tell them my story.
Nice.
The story of unlearning, being uncomfortable. One of the things that I felt was also really important was to explain to them that I wasn't trying to justify sexuality for myself.
Yes.
And I wasn't trying to justify it for a family member. So this wasn't me going, my niece or my nephew or my kid is
my
gay.
brain never went there. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
This is actually about an injustice my motivation was never sexuality.
Yeah.
My motivation was always unpacking second-class citizenship.
Ooh, wow.
Always my motivation. So it was important for me to explain to them that I'm straight.
Yeah.
And this is not something that I'm trying to justify.
Yeah.
But I have a sense that there's so much more learning to do.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And they felt comfortable with that.
I was going to say that would be, so just, Amanda and I have just met today too. And I feel like we've known each other for 30 years. So I feel like you have a way of opening people up. Did you have a list of questions for each person? With that narrative process.
Yeah.
Does it include like the same questions for each person, or does it allow for a conversation that can go in all directions, or how does that work?
Yeah. So what I used was a semi-formal process.
Okay.
So we had the initial meeting, and then we had the interview meeting. And the interview meeting was anywhere from an hour to 2 hours.
Wow.
And 2 hours is way too long, really, because they're exhausted by that stage. So an hour is pretty key. Yeah. I used semi-open questions, and I also used a method where I tracked it from the beginnings of their faith. Mm-hmm. So I got them to talk about their upbringing, how they discovered the presence of God.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then we talked about the beginnings of sexuality.
Yeah.
When was the first time that you looked at the same sex and thought, oh, actually that's kind of hot?
Yeah.
And then the next part was unpacking their coming out story.
Ooh. I'm
Really
going to guess there were
powerful.
tears, especially if mine
for
was
me.
involved. Yeah.
yeah. And then the next was people responses. So how do people respond to that? And then the very final one was, so what does your faith look like now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you've gone through all this, and in hindsight, as the interviewees looked back, there were times when they had actually pulled themselves back from God voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that is because a lot of people equate how the church responds with how God will respond.
Gotcha.
Right? So we automatically think someone is going to reject us.
That's
so we
right.
go, okay, I'm not going there. I'm stepping back. It's survival.
Yeah.
But what they discovered is that God never left them.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And their coming out was so that they could be not just authentic as a person, but also spiritually authentic.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah.
That authenticity side of things.
Yeah.
Did you find that most, because you had 7 people, correct? Mm-hmm. 3 women, 4 men? Is that right?
4 women, 3 men.
4 women, 3 men. Did you find that most of them found that, because they're quite young, did they find that feeling of authenticity? Or I feel like it's a journey.
Yeah. I think it's a ongoing creative process that God allows.
Yeah.
Like we talked before about landing. Like, have I got this figured out? No, I haven't got this figured out. Because in 6 months' time, it's going to look different again.
That's right.
So for them, it's an ongoing process. Bruce and I had dinner with them a couple of months ago, and they brought their partners, and it was the best night that I've had for so long.
That's so cool.
They were so loving. They were so respectful of each other and the group.
I feel like your house would feel like if it was at your house, wherever you and Bruce are, would be a very safe place.
Yeah.
Bruce, we talked earlier today, Bruce was the first grown adult male to actually sit me down.
Yeah.
Like on the first time we met.
Yeah.
And ask questions where I was like, holy shit, this guy gets it. And he was seeking to understand, not to fix anything or to put his life into perspective. And I hadn't had that.
Yeah.
Well, before or since.
Yeah.
Shout out, Bruce. So I feel like maybe everybody, I feel like that would have been a magical evening.
Yeah. As I did the interviews and as they talked, one of my fellow pastors from my old church, she taught me how to extract stories from people. And one of the things that she taught me was to ask the question, can you help me understand that?
Ooh.
Because often we don't know what we don't know. And so through these interviews, I kept asking, can you help me understand that?
Yeah.
Because really, I'm clueless and I need to know what you're talking about. I need to
Yeah.
know how that feels for you, the emotions behind that, the spirituality.
That's a lovely way just to
that.
approach
Yeah.
any really conversation where you're seeking to understand.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Thinking about sexuality is just I don't know, for me, it's been an interesting ride the last 5 years of my life, living most of my life in heterosexual relationships, married to a man for 14 years, and then coming out of that, marrying a woman. Everybody, it seemed like my coming out story was really cool. I was full of love and acceptance, and even the most Catholic of Catholic family members of mine were like, sweet, cool, we love you. You're just the rainbow sheep of the family now. So there was a part of me that felt like it was just a little bit too easy, and maybe that there should have been more friction with that. Yeah. But I think the friction came in maybe in the same sense that other people were turning off that God sound and putting it away and going, no, God will not be there for me. My big thing was like, I didn't want to just boil myself down to a sexuality. And when it comes to identity and unpacking that, how were these young people looking at their identity? Was their sexuality just a piece of who they are?
Very much. Yeah, very much. So what I did after the interviews is I asked all 7 interviewees to take sort of 2 weeks to marinate in what they'd shared with me, and then to write a 300-word reflection.
Oh, wow.
And within their 300-word reflection, many of them talked about, don't judge me on my sexuality. Don't think that's all that I'm about. Yeah. It's part of my identity, but there's so many other parts. Like, I'm compassionate.
Yep.
I love music.
Yep.
I love people. I love animals. I love God. I love, there's all these different things to people's personalities and identities. And sexuality is just one. Yeah. And, I mentioned this before when we were just in the other room. I think the danger with church or religion is that we have put sexuality on the altar.
Yes.
And we've done that very much with heterosexuality and with the idea of marriage, that this is the goal.
Yes.
And we've actually put it on an altar, and we don't realise that we've made a golden calf out of it.
That's right.
So we have to make sure that we don't put other people's sexuality, rather than a golden calf, as something dirty.
Yeah.
Or something wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's just a small part of a person's identity. Within a Christian or religious frame, none of my interviewees said they'd chosen this.
Wow. Yeah.
This was not a choice, and yet they had been told through sermons, perhaps, through conversations, through jokes, through looks, that being gay was not okay. And that comes out in silly things like people who put on camp voices, right?
Or walk around funny or pull...
Yeah, and they're doing it in a derogatory way. Right. So they all knew from very young, they'd been indoctrinated into understanding that heterosexuality was the only thing that God blessed.
Ooh.
Yeah. So for them, the idea that they're not heterosexual, for them means that they weren't blessed.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always been a real, I guess, curiosity and confusion of mine in equal parts around why people care so much about who other people lay down next to at night. If you're loving and you're caring and you're making the world a better place through connecting and empathy, I've never, ever and maybe that's because of my parents, but I've never understood why people give a shit. Yeah. And why religion would put so much onus on that. I get it in a historical context. Yeah. I get it in times of like when there was plague and we needed to create more humans for the earth, to populate the earth, that religious dogma changed over the years to meet cultural context. But in today's society, it just boggles my mind that there are just such fundamental beliefs that are just really kind of getting tougher and tougher to inculcate. So it must be interesting for you too, then. I can understand the 6 months of tears to go, how do I bring these two things together?
Yeah. I couldn't I couldn't have done any of my research without reading outside of my confirmation bias.
Yes.
So it meant that I had to deliberately go and look for respected scholars.
Yes.
And some of them had been very much in the fundamental camp.
Yeah.
For use of a better word.
Yes. No,
yeah.
That's a good word for it.
It always goes, what am I using the word camp for? So
Fundamentally camp.
Yeah. Oxymoron. So people like David Gushy, he's a well-respected researcher and scholar. So for 20 years, he taught that you couldn't be gay and Christian.
Wow.
They were exclusive from each other. Until he encountered personal people around him that he'd always known as godly people with God's presence in, who came out as gay. And then he had to rethink. He had to unlearn, and he had to relearn. So David Gushy's Changing Our Mind, this one here, I'll just
got a new book list. Yes.
Is a really good starting point.
Okay.
He doesn't go too much into depth, but it's a really good starting point to make you think, to make you go, maybe I haven't got it right.
It's so powerful in today's day and age, especially with our social media and digital media kind of conundrum, that content world we're living in, where algorithms serve you your bias consistently.
Absolutely.
To go intentionally outside of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
Something I think we all need to do more often. So fantastic.
Yeah.
Any other books that
So the David Gushy one. My favourite for someone who really wants to dig in is Bible, Gender, Sexuality by James Brownson.
All right.
This one is particularly good. Brownson goes into much more detail. And you can see, like, I've underlined heaps of stuff in my books. I always write in my books. That's why I never lend my personal copies out, because all my
people
little
know
notes
the inner workings of your brain. Oh.
Yeah. So James Brownson, for anyone who wants to dig a little deeper into that, is really good.
Really good.
Vicky Beeching, Undivided. Do you know Vicky Beeching?
I do know Vicky Beeching.
Yeah.
I haven't read any of her
She's an
stuff.
English lady who made it big in America in the worship scene.
Yeah.
So she knew from a young age that she was gay, and she also knew that she had to keep it quiet. And it wasn't until her body started to disintegrate and fight itself, and the doctor that she went to said, "You've got something that you're holding on to, and your body is responding." And she knew exactly what it was.
Amazing.
So she came out, and of course the very next day she loses all her contracts. She gets death threats from Christians. It's the whole story. And she's got a theology degree. So it's a really good read of her story, and she interweaves some really good theology into that. So for an upfront, I know what this is like story, Vicky Beeching is very good.
I feel like I need to read that one.
Yeah. And then this one here is Our Witness. So this one is a collection of stories, American and Canadian, I believe. So it's a collection, I think there's 28 stories in there.
Wow.
Of people who are still in the church system. They're fully out about their sexuality, and they talk about their journey, they talk about the shame that they had, they talk about coming out for God. That's the spiritual authenticity. So when you start, like I started with 7 stories, but when you start to read wider, all these stories are bubbling up to the surface that have previously been told to be quiet. And it's
the silence, right? It's the shame, the guilt, the silence.
Brené Brown, right?
I love Mama Brené.
So it's the shame versus the guilt. It's the need for belonging. It's all of that whole aspect that Brené talks about.
It's connection, it's sustaining you, right? As being a soul sustainer.
I see you.
Yeah, that's right.
It's so important. So these are kind of my 4 go-to books, and then there's also some videos that are really, really good. what I can do is I can give you a list of those when
That'd
we're
be awesome,
finished,
and we'll
you
put
can
the links
them
up. We will put the links up
Yeah.
and the names of the books.
Yes, and if you want a link to the thesis, honestly, it's not a hard read.
It's a good read, though.
Yeah, there's 2 chapters in there that are a little bit sticky because it
Yeah.
has to do the methodology and
Yep.
the text, but anyone is welcome to download and read that. Please just pass it on. Yeah.
It's an interesting one. I've got an aunt who, I think she's almost 70. She might be 70 this year. And she came out 2 years ago.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing.
Right. And it was kind of, and by coming out, I mean to the family.
Yeah.
She looked like a gorgeous Katie Lang her whole life. So, and always had partners who were women. So it was like we knew, but nobody
said it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the elephant in the room. Yeah.
Nobody talked about it. Mom and dad used to kind of nudge each other and just show like a bit of love. So she knew like she was comfortable. But my aunt has always been in and around the church. And she's finally found a church which is open and honest. And the pastors are mostly women. They are LGBTQ. And to see her thriving in the last 2 years. And I think a lot of it had to do with my wife and I just coming out and going, we're here, we're queer, or whatever we are today.
Yeah, whatever the terminology
Gay,
is.
lesbian, whatever the word is. I'm married to a woman. It's been amazing to watch my aunt flourish in her years, at least older years with our family, because the story she's starting to tell and unpack from the 70s and the 80s, when my context of her was Thanksgiving dinners and birthdays and every once in a while during the summer. Holy shit. Yeah. What a rip snorting amazing woman. But I know she struggled with religion. I know she tried with different churches. So I think as the generation under that, I personally have always shied away from religion because of that. I've never heard people like you speak before. So I've always wondered, I've always had this little probably cynicism in the back of my brain going, still probably not going to get me into church, you know? But I've got this like longing for a way to put into words the feeling of the bigness in the sky or the bigness in the universe.
Yeah, whatever terminology that you put to that is a spirituality. Yeah.
So do you feel there are more and more people like you these days? Is it a modern thing, or is it a going back to Jesus? I saw AOC. Did you see AOC in the States? She just put on to Twitter. Well, she didn't. The world picked it up onto Twitter this morning. She spent 2 minutes talking about Jesus and about how religion is about seeing people. It's about inviting people in who you think, like the Cornelius story, who you think might be unwashed. It's the exact opposite of what fundamentalists are preaching.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it feels like the world is coming to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going back to the essence
of that love, right?
Of that love. The idea that Jesus comes down and is us and is God. And how Jesus responds and relates to people in just those years is the indicator that there are no walls and there are no barriers.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. You think about...
Because when you read it and that's your story, you go, okay, I can get on board with that.
Yeah. And it's actually... He's such a badass.
I always call him the first rock star of the world.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. You know, there's little lines in the Bible, and Jesus ate with a leper. And you just wash right over it, right? And you go, we should be going, what the frick?
See, I read those things and I think of the people in the 80s during the AIDS crisis. Who were the ones? I've got a friend whose Mama Mary, she's amazing. She would, I think it was in the 80s or the early 90s, she was in London and she was one of the few people helping on the AIDS wards. Yeah. And I think that's what I think as godliness. Yeah. You know?
Do you know why the L comes LBG? So through the AIDS epidemic, the lesbian community were the ones that donated blood and also cared for the gay men. And so out of respect, the L comes first.
Which is interesting, and this would be a whole other conversation about my time within Pride. Yeah. There are so many men who want to call it GLBT, and it just really rankles my gears.
Yeah.
Because come on, guys, you don't always have to be on top. Like, not always.
Not always.
I did not know that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Let me check our time.
How
We
we
are right
doing?
on time.
We're right on time. Okay.
Wow.
Well done.
I thought I was going to cry. I actually, I thought Amanda was going to have me
Damn, I
just
should have got a little longer.
ugly
Give me
crying.
5 more minutes. Yeah.
Gosh, I'd love to have you back.
Yeah.
If you'd like to come
Yeah,
back.
love to. I mean, there's so much in the thesis that, like, even just reading their post-interview reflections,
Yeah.
they will,
I feel
they'll
like I'll
bring
have
the
to do that
tears.
with
yeah,
tequila.
yeah,
Yeah.
box tissues.
I like to close every show by asking you to call out somebody in your life who is a kindness warrior. So I feel like in my lifetime, there have been a lot of people who've told me I'm too nice or I'm too kind to other people. And I just called bullshit on that about 5 years ago. And I was like, you can be kind, but also really clear and have firm boundaries. So it's a kindness warrior.
Yeah.
So who's somebody in your life that you could, or a few people that you would call out as a kindness warrior for you?
I think a friend called Jill Shaw. She's a chaplain at Massey. She's American, and she calls me out.
Love those kinds of friends.
And then I have another friend called Judy Eden.
Yeah.
And she's the one that goes, so how you doing, Amanda? I go, yeah, I'm good. No,
How are you doing?
no, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And I hate it. Like, I've told her,
So
stop it.
stiff upper lip. Nope.
But she doesn't let me get away with it.
Love those kinds of friends.
And the beautiful thing about that is I then get to process
Yeah.
stuff that I need to process. So
That's
yeah,
so amazing.
yeah. And then of course Bruce.
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 Bruce. So Jill, Judy, Bruce.
Yeah.
Little mention
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Kindness Warriors. Thank you, Amanda, so much for today.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Loved it.
I feel like I'm going to need to do like a post-interview analysis in 2 weeks too.
Book
So
me
thank you.
anytime.
Yeah.
That's all good. That's all good.
Good therapy.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.